Hi, everyone, and thanks for joining us. My name is Morgan, and I'll be moderating today's conversation. It's actually an AMA today, and Ask Me Anything, but we'll be talking about AI governance. And if you're new to Transcend, we provide governance solutions for enterprise data, helping companies unlock new business opportunities with a unified governance platform for data privacy and AI. And if you're new to the AMA format, it's essentially a live Q&A session. When we've done these panels on AI governance in the past, we had so many questions, we couldn't get to them all. We ran out of time. So we wanted to do a panel that was just for you, just to take your questions. So I will kick us off with a question that we weren't able to get to in a past panel, but please do make use of the Q&A. It should be at the bottom of your screen. And yeah, we'll get things started. So joining me today are Ben Brook and Daniel Goldberg. And guys, I'll let you introduce yourselves.
Sure, I'm happy to start. So I'm Ben Brook. I'm the co-founder and CEO here at Transcend. As Morgan said, we are a data privacy governance platform. So we help businesses and have historically helped businesses across all sort of categories of data mapping, automating privacy requests, collecting consent in a way that makes sense in each sort of region, and enforcing that across all your different sort of front end and back end properties. And as this very sort of technical governance layer for our customers, where we're very deeply embedded in systems, very much like the technical team in privacy, we've been very much getting pulled into the room on these sort of internal AI governance councils that our customers have. And we've been helping them sort of navigate the waters of how to, much like privacy might be governed, how can we actually set governance and technical controls within our AI systems? So we've had the sort of benefit of being really in the trenches with customers on this front. And we've started building new products in the AI governance space. This is all new stuff. I have no illusions that I am a total expert yet, because this whole industry is maybe 6 months old in terms of actually governing these systems in the way that we expect they will be regulated. This is all very frontier stuff. So we're here to sort of share our knowledge, what we've seen so far in practice, what are the practical implementations, what are we seeing coming down the pike with regulations and so forth. So excited to dive in here, and I'll pass it over to Daniel for his intro.
Yeah, thanks, Ben. That's a great point about expertise, because these days you go on LinkedIn and everybody's an AI expert, and I'm like, wow, AI really only has become mainstream for the last 6 months. I'm impressed how you're an expert already on it. So hi, everybody. Welcome today. I am Daniel Goldberg. I am chair and partner in the privacy and data security group at the law firm Frankfurt Kurnit Klein Selz. Our firm is a mid-sized firm, has about 150 lawyers, and we do everything across the board, but we do a lot of work in the technology world. And so in my world specifically, I deal with all things data, dealing with GDPR, California privacy law, and of course, new issues that are arising from technologies, including AI. And we have worked with Transcend in the past, and this is one of the reasons we wanted to put this on for you guys today, was that Ben and I have had discussions, and Morgan, and we've talked through all of these issues, and it is a rapidly changing ecosystem. And so many of my clients have questions, and they're saying, what does this mean? How does this overlap with privacy obligations? What should I be thinking about with respect to my contracts? And these are really good questions that we're all kind of dealing with together. So, today is really intended to be interactive. Our intent is, Ben and I have been, before this, we kind of were doing a warm-up, thinking about things about it. But it's just a really quickly evolving space. And I always say, if we gave this presentation 6 months from now, I may have a completely different analysis for you. So really appreciate you all being here and looking forward to our dialogue today.
Awesome. Thanks for that, guys. So like I said, I'm going to start with a question that I really liked and we didn't get to in a past session. But in that session, we talked about how, if the internet was invented today, how would we build it differently? How would we regulate things differently? And this question came from that. And she asked, since companies have their attention on AI, is this an opportunity to piggyback better privacy strategies, i.e. privacy by design, onto AI governance? And how can privacy pros make that happen?
Yeah. I'm happy to kick us off, Daniel, unless you have anything at the gate that you wanted to start with.
Well, go for it, Ben, and I'll jump in.
Yeah, so I think one of the things that I think we all experience right now in privacy is a really common question around like, how do I know when it's time to kick off a privacy impact assessment? And a lot of that comes down to the process that it already exists of product management and deploying product. So basically, privacy professionals are sort of asking like, when do I insert myself into this process? Because we have to basically be able to run impact assessments before we launch features into the public that may impact privacy. And so it's like, do we do it during the PRD process? Do we do it like before the code gets merged? How do we sort of like alter existing internal process to do it? And oftentimes it's less explicit than that. And like product managers kind of are trained to know when to put their hands up and say, hey, like, this is probably something we should talk about. Knock on wood, we hope that's how it works. But with AI, there is a very new, immature, undeveloped process for deploying AI models. So at least relative to existing sort of product deployment. So I think this is kind of one of the first places where you can kind of piggyback better privacy strategy is like get involved in that process of like, okay, we want to build, train, test a model. There are many steps in that process today, which are about quality assurance of the model and about accuracy of the model. How can you get ahead of that and actually get your sort of privacy review into that process? And actually, before it sort of calcifies into sort of a status quo operational process in your company, can you get the privacy assessment into that? And so that's something that I think we can start with. There's also inevitably going to be more than just a privacy impact assessment associated with deploying an AI model. And so I would also encourage you to start building the muscle around like, how are we testing this model for accuracy in its responses? How are we testing this model for bias in decision making? Do we have a process if we're performing automated decision making to allow for a human review and allow for a dispute? What's the channel? Is it open? Does this exist? So there's kind of a lot that you can do today with that with this new process as it's being stood up. And so I would encourage you to start there. I think it also will just kind of bring you into that room with the engineering team, and they might start bringing more up that you'll kind of be able to pull on that thread of like, there's other models that you may not even know about yet, and that's a good foot in the door.
Yeah, no, I agree with everything you just said, Ben. What I think, to me, the high level is that everything in privacy that we have developed over the last 10 years is reactionary. And so what's happened has been, company goes, oh, I want to engage in this marketing. We're going to collect this data. We don't know what we're going to do with it. We're going to collect it here. Oh, and then we're going to have all this data here that's going to be secured in this system. IT owns that, right? Marketing owns one thing. Sales owns one thing. IT does. And then when GDPR came into play, all of a sudden there was this discussion of like, whoa, I have to limit what data I'm collecting. I have to build processes. And we use this term now, data governance, right? But governance is really what's important, is this idea that we need to have procedures and practices throughout the organization from the top down, where all stakeholders have an interest. And essentially there's not repetition where one group is doing something and the other is. I've heard that before, where two groups are running the same type of impact assessment, which one governs, all these different issues. What AI, I do think, is going to become a fundamentally huge part of companies. We're just at the beginning. So similar to what we were thinking about, if I could go back in time, to the mid 2000s and go, hey, let's build privacy by design from the top down into your organization. That's exactly what I would be doing. And again, so that's policies, procedures. It's also technology, like what Ben is talking about here. And so to me, that's where the opportunity lies, is to build that from top down now. Now, what I think is important is that we don't want to just toss away everything we've been doing. You've probably already been building policies and procedures and governance with respect to privacy and data. So many of those things you may already be able to use. So for example, impact assessments, which are required under many privacy laws now, could be repurposed and also used in ways to address the use of AI systems and functionality overall. So that's the idea, is that we can kind of take these policies and governance we previously built and apply them towards AI. But it's not exactly the same, so we do need to make some changes as well around that.
Yeah, I'll also just maybe plus one the technical side. The thing that we didn't get to do with privacy was design all of our systems to be sort of forward compatible with privacy requirements. So like if we were building like databases post GDPR and like databases didn't exist yet, what we would probably do is like centralize all the personal data into like one little area of it, and then everything else is tokenized. All the other systems have like tokenized versions of data. Makes it very simple to like delete a user. We don't have to go into like 1,000 different business systems. So that, like the analogy there is like we built our systems in a way which are not forward compatible with like current privacy requirements. And now we're doing this like crazy cleanup process. Now the sort of equivalent thing in AI right now is like, is there a way that we can actually architect the way we use AI systems such that they are forward compatible with upcoming governance requirements? And so if, for example, you want a policy in your company that says we never send, sensitive health information into a third-party AI model, like how could you actually govern that? And so we believe at Transcend that all that data should go through a central layer where there's kind of a single like gateway into the like LLMs that you might be using, and all chatter kind of goes through this central like wheelhouse, so that you can then set any kind of policy or observability or governance. And that sort of helps you early on get that architectural hygiene where you can, very reasonably govern that tomorrow or in 5 years when these requirements get more and more complex. And so we have that opportunity to build architectures that are future proof. And so I would definitely be looking at that if you can.
And yeah, we could keep talking, right, Ben, forever on this. So what I was going to say is the thing that I am seeing, right, the big focus that regulators are having now, where we're moving towards, is around accountability and documentation. And that's the issue, is that right now, like this is the number one question I get from clients is, how do I demonstrate that I am in compliance? If a regulator comes to me, how do I show, like, look at my systems, look at everything? And especially if your data is all over the place and you do not have centralized systems and technology, it's going to be really, really tough. So I don't have a crystal ball. I can't tell you what the law is going to look like in 6 months, in a year, in 2 years. But what I can say is that I do think we're going to start seeing a lot more inquiries from regulators, which looks a lot like what we've seen historically on the security side. How do you maintain the security of your system? Same thing. Like, how are you maintaining the privacy? What are you doing with respect to your vendors? What do your contracts look like? Where are your data flows? And that type of stuff, to the extent you can demonstrate that, that is really going to put you in a position that you will really be able to mitigate a lot of the risk around using these types of processes.
Thanks, guys. I think that was a great way to kick us off. We do have one question specifically for Daniel. It says, in Daniel's experience, which execs beyond the privacy team representation is he seeing most often calling timeout on a mass AI rollout due to governance concerns? Is he seeing this as a catalyst for privacy teams to get a seat at the table where they previously had not?
So the question, just so I understand it, Morgan, is saying, is this a way that companies or privacy teams are basically saying like they're taking on the AI stuff and they're able to get a seat at the table? Is that right?
Yeah, that's my understanding of it. Is AI a way for teams to get a seat at the table when they didn't have one before because they have, I think, more experience in governance and data protection?
Look, it's a really good question. The privacy landscape since I've been in it has evolved so dramatically. Like I remember I used to go to these conferences and it would be like, how to explain to your CEO that you need to get anything for privacy, that you should set $10,000 aside for privacy. And look how far we've evolved since GDPR. So I will tell you, this is something that's happening. I'm seeing this at every organization, firm, et cetera, is that there's kind of a grab to say like, who is going to be responsible for AI, right? Who does AI sit with? Who owns that? Who's the stakeholder? And what you're going to see is you're going to see those that are in the IP space are going to say, oh, that really belongs to me because it's an intellectual property issue. And then you're going to see those that are on the IT side that are going to say, oh, well, that really belongs to me because it's a security issue. And then you're going to see those in the privacy landscape. And we have seen this with certain privacy organizations say, oh, well, it's really a privacy issue. And I think the answer is it's all of the above. And this is a really tough, I don't have a good answer for this. Like, I think this is organization specific around who this should sit with. And I do think that there is a natural fit that it works very well with privacy in a lot of ways, but it's broader than privacy because it really is around data. And so much of the issues, and I think Ben and I will probably get into this later, depending on the questions, would be like, they really are focused on IP. They're not focused around privacy issues. So yes, I think so, and that's a long-winded way of saying, I do think it's a way that some privacy folk will use it to get more of a seat at the table. But on the other hand, I'm not convinced it will live with privacy ultimately either.
Yeah, I can add maybe 2 bullets on this. So I think in terms of like who is kind of pumping the brakes on like rapid adoption. So I think in larger companies, a lot of the first early day sort of brake pumping will happen out of security. For example, they may not be comfortable hiring a third-party SaaS company to basically power their AI, and some of them have been waiting for cloud hosting providers to offer sort of more sort of self-hostable solutions which they can control, and then others who are in more regulated industries are just not touching it yet because of legal and security risk, given the sort of categories of information that they have. They've been basically just saying like, no shot yet. We're going to wait till this matures out a little bit. And I think the reason for that is like, these are all very new systems. And we have, I think, very little insight into the quality of their security at this point in time. So for example, everybody's trying to adopt their first like vector database and their first retrieval augmented generation architecture. They're using new SDKs. They're using, new LLMs. They're using new types of databases where they're basically sending all of their data. And that is that kind of like new frontier and the degree of data that's going into it is very sort of scary for a CISO or a security person. So that we see is very commonly like a place where we're pumping the brakes. And then just one other sort of note on like who owns this. So I agree completely with Daniel. I think privacy owns a good chunk of it. There's more to the picture, as always. There's going to be more general legal issues, going to be more general security issues. But what's interesting on the regulatory front is all of the data protection authorities in Europe are also fighting to own AI. And so it's not just the privacy teams in the companies, but it's also the regulatory landscape. They're sort of trying to show that they are knowledgeable about AI and that they are the natural choice to actually be the regulator of for example, the EU AI Act. And so there's the jury's very much still out about whether the CNIL and the ICO or the various privacy data protection authorities will actually be the regulators on the on AI regulation, and so they're sort of going through that same motion. But it's interesting to see that sort of parallelism on both sides. And if it goes to the data protection authorities, then I think it becomes even more natural for privacy teams to be a very central owner, at least as it relates to the regulatory side.
And that's a really good point, Ben. In the United States, I actually think it's a little bit more clear in that it really seems to be regulators focused on privacy that are trying to take the first stab at this. We have California with the CPPA and its new regs. We have Colorado. Interestingly enough, we've seen some focus by like the insurance side of the industry and also employment law areas, really with regulators that are focused on like the privacy issues around that. So I do think in the US, at least for now, it is the privacy side of things that is really taking the focus from the regulatory perspective. I do anticipate we will probably see like chief AI officers, right? If not already, I have seen postings for companies around people who have like 7 to 10 years in generative AI. And I'm like, okay, well, sure, you're not paying them enough if they have that much experience in the posting. But I do think it's going to become something that is a position at companies to be, looking and regulating the risk around it.
Awesome. We've got a lot of questions stacking up, so I'm going to move on to the next one. I really like this one, actually. It says, not all AI is created equal. Generative AI is getting the most attention now, but not all AI products are generative. Companies have been using non-generative AI for years. Should they do an audit of all vendors and what types of AI they are implementing? What types of AI should companies give more attention to?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So yes, AI and what I sort of bucket as like predictive AI has been around for a long time. The thing about predictive AI is not only has it been around for a while, but I think it's also more like, for lack of a better word, predictable, where we actually have a clearer sense of like the applications of what a given predictive AI model is. And usually the sort of territory of risk comes down to things like bias, harm, accuracy, and in privacy, automated decision-making, and all the sort of rights that would follow from that. And so I do think you should absolutely be looking at all AI models. But in terms of like the unknown unknowns, I would be thinking about generative and getting ahead of the like potential uses in your business on generative AI. Because the truth is, like, most businesses, probably yours, is rapidly adopting generative AI in ways that you may not be aware of yet. And that can sort of come, that all of the predictive AI sort of categories of risk around automated decision-making and et cetera, all of those still apply, because generative AI can be used for predictive use cases and decision-making. But it can also be used for all kinds of other stuff, like generating content which may be harmful to a user, or maybe exposing information about another user, or has like serious IP issues because it's basically infringing on someone else's creative work. And so it is just a large frontier, and it's so general in its capabilities that, like, it's almost like just hiring it's almost like hiring an employee, right? It can just do anything, right? And so but people are using it in all kinds of ways that you may not be aware of yet. And so trying to actually like understand it, get a category, like understand the categories of risk, I think that is like, that's going to be unique to your business. And I think that's the place to prioritize right now. But that's not to say that traditional AI systems don't have risks and that you shouldn't look at it. I think that should happen as well, for sure. But yeah, right now, I think because it's topical, there are more risks in generative AI.
Yeah, no, Ben is right. And this is what I would say, this is like a risk-based analysis for the company. And I'm looking at the highest risks, of course. So I have a few thoughts. So interestingly, California issued draft regulations around impact assessments recently. And actually, I think that may have been since we gave this presentation, right? Just showing how different things are. And again, this analysis, they're going to have a subsequent round of draft updates in November. So again, in a month from now, this may be different. But in that draft, they have a definition about AI, and it is so broad that it arguably encompasses like any software analysis, right? It's a very, very broad definition. So in that, it says you must conduct an impact assessment around the use of AI, especially, the inputs and the outputs, and if they are likely to have a significant risk for individuals. So I think when I look at this, right, generative AI and non-generative and the risks around it, this goes to the point of saying, like, I think technically you got to look at everything, at all your vendors, but you should prioritize based on those that are the most risky. And I would say generative AI, because of the way inherent to the technology, is higher risk, right, than other types of products. But this is a big issue that's been coming up for my clients, and you're going to hear this a bunch of times, is about accountability, making sure you understand what's happening is with respect to your vendors. You really need to dig in, right? Whether or not they're using AI, I recognize we're talking about AI today, but even if it's not AI, even if it's something different, there's an expectation now that you know what's going on with your vendors and how they are processing data, making sure that they use it for legal purposes. So we go back, and I would want to make sure for all your vendors, you have it clearly documented what they're doing. If it's anything that is sensitive, you may have to have an impact assessment, right? And putting contractual limitations on this and kind of comparing it internally and saying, are we okay with this? And I think that analysis can be applied towards AI as well. So when you're conducting that, that's a general analysis for privacy and security. But as part of that, now you will also have an analysis that's like, what do we think about the legality of the AI work that they're doing here? So that's, again, going back to the beginning around governance and everything. I don't think we need to completely rework the wheel, but if we can develop systems from the top down to incorporate all these elements, AI governance, data governance, security governance, and combine them together into single questionnaires, you will save your teams a lot of time and money. And we don't want to have a separate AI group and a privacy group and an IT group conducting these assessments. We should have one coordinated effort to do it when these questionnaires go out.
Thanks, Daniel. So we've got a couple other questions, and this one I think is probably on a lot of people's minds. So I'm going to go with this one. Do you see the possibility of a comprehensive federal law on AI in the US, or will it be left to state laws or industry self-regulation?
So I'm happy to start with this. I don't know, Morgan. This is this is one that I always say, I'm optimistic that at some point we'll see a federal law, but I am not convinced we're going to see it. There's just so much infighting right now with everything going on at the federal level. We see that right now with what's going on with the speakership. And so, like, if we can't even agree on basics, how can we agree on any type of federal law? What I think we're going to see is something very similar to what's happened on the privacy side of things, where you're just going to have state-by-state regulation. And we are already having that, by the way. Most of the laws that I've seen, there's nothing at this point that is a specific AI law that says this is the regulation for AI. What we've seen are different regimes where AI has been an important part of that, right? So we have California law, CPRA, and automated decision-making is an element of that. We have Colorado privacy law, automated decision-making is a part of that. Many state laws around profiling. We have laws that are dealing with biometric data and algorithms output by those. And we have employment law in New York, for example. So what I think we're going to see is more and more like that, where it's kind of just a spread of a bunch of different states. But I wouldn't be surprised if we start seeing some very, very specific laws governing AI systems. And perhaps at some point we'll get something federal. But again, if we can't even agree on basics, I don't see how we get there anytime soon. Now, there have been discussions and proposals, and maybe there'll be some roundabout way that it happens. I could be totally wrong, but at least that's my initial inclination on this.
That makes a lot of sense. So this one popped up immediately after you started. In the absence of proper legislation and policy, what are the actions that organizations should take to avoid AI privacy breaches and concerns?
So this is the, I'll jump in here again. This is the fundamentals. So I don't think that just because you're working with AI systems, it changes the analysis of everything else you're doing. Like, to me, AI adds obligations. It does not remove obligations. So I would be thinking about all the obligations that you're currently, you need to be doing with respect to privacy. And again, coming back to it, to accountability, to be able to say, what are we doing and how do I demonstrate that? And that's one reason, I like doing this presentation with Transcend and you, Ben, is because I think that it all starts from a technological framework at the very bottom level. You need to work with both outside counsel or in-house if you have a very robust team, right? And probably a technology provider to help you through this. Now, maybe you can build your own internal system, and that's fine, but you got to make sure it's pretty sophisticated and that you can be able to handle all that stuff. Because, I still see companies that are doing manual audits where it's like, here's a questionnaire, we're going to send this and circulate this around to the team, but this is all reactionary, right? And if you take that and you document, oh, here are our flows, here's our security, et cetera, that's just a capture in time at one moment. That's October 11th, 2023. What happens in 2 weeks? So what we need is, you need something more systematic that you're, analyzing the whole time, and that will actually give you true records on this. If you apply that from the top down, having true data governance, I think you'll be in a really good place to help mitigate risks.
Yeah, I agree with everything you said, Daniel. I think right now, like, the biggest sort of immediate risk that I think we will probably see, that our first like AI catastrophes is it's going to come from where it always comes from, which is breach. And so I think like step zero just today is like, make sure that you're adopting AI in a way that's safe and like has like this, at least the sort of minimum standard of like adopting any other sort of vendor, or like sending heaps of your data to any other vendor. You should sort of maintain that high sort of security bar in the first early days, because I think that is where we're going to see like our first like really messed up stuff come. Is just going to be like, oh, we moved too fast and we like totally forgot to like look into the security elements of this because we were just way too excited about the possibilities. So I think we'll see, like, for example, our first like vector database breach, like all the data in there, like even though it's vectors and it looks like it's just like math, like that's all just like plain data. You can easily like pull out like personal data if it's in there. So like all the same things apply of like, you should probably be anonymizing that data before you send it in there. Like, and you should be auditing this like very new cutting edge technology for, for its security properties. So I think that's like the first thing that's going to happen, even in the absence of like new legislation. Like a lot of that stuff is already regulated and it's already sort of an existing risk. And I think we'll also just start seeing like really concerning privacy leaks around like, for example, a chatbot, which is like cross-pollinated with another user's data. I think we'll start seeing stuff like that too, because everybody's building these retrieval augmented or generation or RAG architectures, which are basically chatbots that are powered by your data. And so, it's garbage in, garbage out. And so like, what kind of data is backing that chatbot? Is it like cross-pollinating with other users' data? Like, do you have the right safeguards in place to prevent that, even if you missed on the data side? Like, is there a second, fail safe on that? So I think we'll see another example, the first chatbot that is like seriously leaking other people's data, for example. So those are the sort of like low-hanging fruit risks that I would try to focus on to start.
I agree. And to add on to that, the area that I always see, it always stems from a vendor that a company uses where they don't understand what the vendor is doing. And usually it comes from like the marketing team, and it's either a cheap or free vendor where they're like, as is. And again, it could, I'm just generalizing, right? It's like in India, it's some small startup company that's like, oh yeah, we have this amazing technology that we can do all this generative AI, and it's only going to cost your business $2,500 a month. And, sure, we'll make reps around the data and that the promises and confidentiality, but there's a cap on liability. That's the amount of fees paid, right? So the most you can ever get back from these guys is $25,000. And tomorrow they're probably just going to disappear and shut down if there's ever any type of major data breach. Those are the types of things. Like, I think this is the type of thing where it is really worth investing. If you are serious about Gen AI, like you want to be in this field, like do due diligence on your vendors. Really important. Review your contracts with them. Make sure that they have, appropriate limitations on liability and indemnification and insurance provisions. That's the other thing. You can have like the best, contract, but if they don't have any money to back it, there's no insurance in their guarantee, like they could disappear tomorrow. And I think that really will help. You can't completely stop risk, but you can mitigate it by really understanding and having a good idea what your vendors are doing. Just one more thing I want to add in as I'm thinking about this is that one of the elements of recourse that we've seen by regulators has been algorithmic disgorgement. And that is something that California recently indicated they may be more interested in. And so the other element here is that not only if you have a breach, is it possible you will have to notify and deal with all the data and delete the data, but you may have to delete the benefits that you get from that data to your system, to your AI, if you're building that out. I have no idea what that's going to mean, right? Like in terms of what we've seen the FTC use this, but like I wasn't working on those matters, so I don't know how companies have systematically addressed that. That to me is going to be a very interesting issue about what the expectations are about deleting your algorithms and the benefits derived from data.
All right, lost my mute button there for a second. So we've got another question here. In many organizations, data management, governance, and quality is underdeveloped and underinvested. Has AI changed how business/P&L owners view data as an asset worth stewarding to take advantage?
I mean, I think that it's just another element of how data is viewed. It has like a monetary value to it, right? That data truly is money in that regard. And so if anything, you're going to see more of a focus on the importance of data and having huge amounts of first-party data. Whether or not that by itself is enough to convince the C-suite to invest in more data governance, and I'm not convinced necessarily. I think it depends on the organization. There are some that from the very top down are saying, this is a priority to us, whereas others are kind of like, yeah, it's a risk and we're willing to take that because that comes with the business model. But I think that the risk exposure is going up because as there's more focus on data, on algorithms, on all these elements, your confidential information, we will see more enforcement action on this. Like we're just at the very beginning of what we're going to see.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think there's been a bit of a drive as well, just for like cleaner data that can be used for this like new purpose. And so, yeah, you mentioned first party data. Like I think that I've seen more demand for that in businesses and sort of cleaning up their pipelines a bit. This by the way just started with like GDPR, and this has always kind of been a thing. But with AI, I think a lot of companies are sort of introspecting and sort of thinking about like, okay, how can we actually, like, maybe they have a lot of data and they're like, okay, we need to actually clean this up so we can use it for AI models. You also see, honestly, like a lot of companies trying to like change the policies around their data that they process and try to become more of a controller so that they can start using the data. And so like the demand is there. I think there's definitely a drive for it. And that just naturally will always sort of result in things like increased budget and more focus on how to actually steward the data properly. But yeah, I think it's as Daniel said, it's not like a clear initiative yet, and I think that's kind of on the privacy people in the organization to champion that, even still. So,
and honestly, we probably are not going to see movement on this until we see more personal liability for C-suite and for those involved. And we did see, there was the Drizzly action, which I think was already a year and a half ago, around personal liability that can follow once you leave the organization as well, which is really dangerous. And so, if you're trying to explain like the importance of that, that's a really good place to point to and say, look, we've seen this used before when it's purely like negligent or you really are not doing your duty. And that will wake people up, right? Like that will say, okay, wow, all of a sudden I have skin in the game. It's not just my business where I can disappear from, or sure, we'll pay, whatever the amount is to make it go away because the upside outweighs the risk. And so again, that's always the calculation that we have to have. And that's always the difficulty with being a privacy lawyer is to convey that risk a lot of times to the C-suite level so that they can understand what the real risk is.
Awesome. Well, we've got one more question, which is perfect because we're about at time. Have you seen companies require a limited data use license clause to protect a company's private data, keeping it out of the vendor's Gen AI training data? Would this be the best way to protect a company's private data from being monetized by the vendor? Also, how would a company audit the vendor for this issue?
So I have seen it. I've seen it attempted, at least, Morgan. Whether or not it is successful is very dependent on the vendor and how they use data. Some companies will charge more for that benefit. So it'll be like, hey, look, if you don't want us to be able to use the data for our benefit to augment our systems, then you'll pay us more for that. Others have taken the position that can't be, that's not how it works. So it really depends on your negotiation leverage, and it really depends on what the vendor is willing to do with respect to the negotiations.
Great. Well, we've got 2 more minutes left. Do either of you have any closing thoughts?
I'm happy to offer some quick closing thoughts. So I think right now, like, we kind of started the hour this way, and I think it's probably right to end it there too, which is we are in a very unique opportunity to get ahead of AI governance and future-proof our systems for the inevitable massive amount of governance that we'll have to be doing. And so, like, really think of this as like GDPR came out in 1997. We're just about to build all this infrastructure for our business. How can we design our systems in a way that is future-proof? And how can we really sort of like take this opportunity now to make our jobs easier for the next 4 years? So we have some opinions at Transcend about how to do that around centralized sort of chatter into generative models. But just generally speaking, I think this is something that is worth doing now before it turns into sort of another sort of data sprawl mess where governance becomes this like massive operation of going one by one through all your different systems in the business.
And that's my takeaway too. Data governance from the top down, building like enterprise level to making sure that you can address all these obligations. And it is not always easy to get buy-in from management, right? And the C-suite. And so that's our job, depending on where you sit in the organization, is to get that and to coordinate. And I think to the extent we can have certain stakeholders who take ownership over this, and there's an understanding that those are the stakeholders who own it, and then basically the obligations going down from there, that really will help with compliance. I know, Morgan, in the last question you asked also, like, how does a company audit the vendor? And that's part of data governance, right? That's all built into what I'm talking about, the accountability standards and making sure you have a process to reach out to all of your vendors. I recently have done a lot of stuff, not quite AI, but around SDK use, like third-party technologies and apps and software. And that is a huge area that we're seeing risk around. And again, all about your vendors. It's all who you're using to deploy this. I went recently to this conference, Programmatic IO, and they're like, oh yeah, we're going to be doing programmatic AI. That's what the new technology is. And I'm like, I don't even know how that works, but like, cool, same thing. Like, you need to make sure you understand what's happening. And we just can't rely anymore on statements and all the legal jargon to say, and business jargon of like, oh yeah, this is what we do, no problem. Of course, like, you actually have to dig down and have records about it. And I think that helps address your audit requirements. That helps address your disclosure requirements, and also with respect to your data subject right requirements and everything else around it. So that's the world that we're moving toward.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Ben. Thank you, Daniel. I think this was a great session, and thank you to everyone who attended for your amazing questions. If you have any other questions after the fact, please do reach out to us. And yeah, have a great rest of your day. Thanks.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks, Daniel.